Hi, I'm Chris Cramer. I'm a chemistry professor at the University of Minnesota.
And I'm Marc Hillmyer. I'm also a chemistry professor at the University of Minnesota. I'm also the director of the Center for Sustainable Polymers here, headquartered here at the University of Minnesota.
And so Marc and I have agreed that we're each going to offer an example from our own past of advisor-student conflict and try to draw a lesson out of how it was resolved and ended. So, shall I start?
Please.
Okay, I'm going to play the role of the student, actually. This happened when I was a graduate student. And so I worked in synthetic organic chemistry and was at a group meeting one evening with the rest of my fairly large research group. And at that meeting, my research advisor chose to chastise all of us for not working hard enough. And it was kind of a long chastising, as a matter of fact. And a lot of people were kind of depressed afterwards. And so we went out to drown our sorrows. I came back to the lab about midnight, having drowned a little bit of sorrow, and he was still in his office. So I went in and I said, "What is it with you destroying group morale on a regular basis?" And I probably wouldn't have said that had it not been for the drowning of sorrows part. But to my surprise, perhaps, I suppose, he had me sit down and we had a conversation for about 40 minutes. Part of that conversation included him pointing out that, you know, you don't get training in being a research advisor. You just kind of arrive and you wing it, which is true, to be perfectly honest. And he seemed to actually internalize what we were talking about, and I felt at the end of that conversation that it had been a really worthwhile effort. And instead of feeling frustrated and angry, I felt that I had conveyed something that he would find useful and would be to the benefit of the group. So the moral of that story, I suppose, is don't just internalize frustrations and never bring it up and, you know, let that kind of thing fester, but instead take the opportunity, perhaps not after drinking beer, to you know, present in a calm fashion why you think an advisorial activity might not have been warranted.
That's a great story, actually. I think one of the things I felt when you were telling the story is that you came into his office, and then it was this long conversation discussing the issue. My guess is there must have been a sense of relief from both of you that your advisor was willing to address the issue, and probably your advisor felt like, I don't know if he felt this way exactly, but felt like, wow, this is something I think that that I'm glad somebody brought up, and maybe it will be helpful for the future in the way I interact with the group.
You know, I do think that, and it also taught me something that I've often said afterwards, which is, you know, there are people who can be very difficult to work for, but who are wonderful to work with.
Right.
And it's when you establish your bona fides as someone who wants that kind of respect that you can earn it, where otherwise it might not be given, even if it should.
Yeah, I can't tell you the number of times where I felt that genuine sense of kind of relief and like, oh, I'm so glad, from both my perspective and the student's perspective, I'm so glad that we talked about this issue, and I wish we would have talked about it earlier. And you know, my story is along the lines where the end result was this sense of relief, is that I had been having trouble, this is a while back now, with a student that I kept thinking that we had clear expectations, that this number of experiments we were supposed to do was supposed to be done, this paper was supposed to be done, I was supposed to get a chapter of the thesis. I'm not remembering all the specifics of what it was, but the student was not meeting those. And the student was getting frustrated because they felt that they were meeting aspects of it, and it kept going and going and going. And finally, it was kind of a very difficult conversation, and the student ultimately said, actually, I've been having some very difficult personal problems at home, and it's really been impacting my ability to get my job done here in your lab. And I need to talk to you about that, and I need to talk to you about how to time I might need off to take care of that. And two things happened in that conversation for me. One was I recognized immediately that it made sense now. It made sense why my expectations were not being met, because there was this whole other part of the student's life that had kind of gone upside down. And I asked myself at that point, how come I didn't recognize that earlier, and what could I have done? And I think the student also felt like, I mean, I was very empathetic with the student at the time because it was a serious issue. I think the student felt a huge sense of relief that they actually got it off their chest, they actually put it out there, and that my response was not one of shame, it was not one of, you know, that I don't care about that reason, you still sort of got your work done. My response was more of, I understand. And I think when we got past that point, we had a much, much better working relationship, and ended up, the person ended up getting their degree and ended up being able to resolve not only their professional life by the completion of the degree, but also this personal situation also ended up getting resolved. But that conversation happened way too late. It happened way too late. It happened after many, many of a stressful and troublesome conversation. And I could have done a better job by saying, is there anything else wrong? Is there something else you don't want to tell me? You don't have to divulge details, but maybe you want to tell me if something else is going wrong. And I try to do that now. If I really see, I can sense the tension, I can sense the anxiety. And the student could have felt maybe a little bit more comfortable in broaching that subject earlier on in this situation. And sometimes those personal problems actually come under the heading of mental health issues, and graduate school is a very stressful time, and there's a lot of moving parts. You're teaching, you're taking classes, you're doing research, you're supposed to be writing papers, oral exams, third-year presentations here at the University of Minnesota. All these things come up and they kind of be overwhelming. So I think you should recognize that at the University of Minnesota, but in many other universities, there are many outlets to help for help with mental health issues.
Yeah, so I took away one other thing from that story, Mark, which I think is a great one. I think productivity is often a source of conflict between graduate students and advisors. And it might not be that it's a personal issue, although it certainly could be. Sometimes it's just a failure to adequately communicate how much you've done that might not have worked because it's research, but you didn't bring up the 200 NMRs that you took, which didn't show the reaction proceeding the way it was supposed to if it was synthetic chemistry, whatever it might be. And the advisor didn't ask about it. All that happened was, you addressed some small question and it seemed like not enough progress was made. So there's room for both sides. The student to be a little bit more upfront about all the things that actually have been done, even though they might not have led to conclusive research directions, and for the advisor maybe to ask that question rather than just kind of being frustrated as the student leaves of, what's been holding up our progress? Are there suggestions for things we should do differently? Because students are often reluctant to present negative results, and sometimes projects need to be terminated, right? They're just not going to work.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more.
And it's to nobody's benefit if it drags out a long time before that decision is made. So when it comes to discussing productivity, students should be prepared to explain that things aren't working for a reason that goes beyond laziness, which sometimes would be an assumption that's not warranted.
I completely agree.